The moment Adina Mitchell collapsed in the hospital emergency room, gasping for breath and clutching her chest, no one knew this would become the story that changed everything. The prestigious Memorial Heights Hospital stood tall and gleaming, its marble floors spotless, its reputation untouchable. But what happened next left everyone frozen, as a heartless administrator demanded payment before treatment while an elderly woman struggled to breathe. A crowd gathered, phones recording the unthinkable scene. The administrator's voice echoed through the emergency room, cold and uncaring. "Without insurance or upfront payment, we cannot proceed with treatment." Adina's eyes filled with tears, her breathing growing more labored by the second. The other patients watched in horror, some turning away, unable to witness such cruelty in a place meant for healing. Then a man in a black jacket stepped forward from the back of the room. His presence commanded attention, though no one recognized him yet. The administrator's smug expression faltered as the stranger approached the desk. What happened in the next few minutes would not only save a life but would expose a broken system and become a viral sensation that forced an entire hospital to confront its humanity. This was the day Keanu Reeves walked into Memorial Heights Hospital and showed the world what real healthcare should look like. No one realized then that this moment would spark a revolution in patient care, all because one Hollywood star refused to stand by and watch an innocent woman suffer. But first, we need to understand how Adina Mitchell ended up here, fighting for her life while being denied the very care she desperately needed. Adina Mitchell woke up every morning at precisely 6:30 a.m., a habit from her 30 years as a kindergarten teacher that refused to fade even 5 years into retirement. Her small apartment on Cedar Street filled with golden sunlight as she went through her morning routine, carefully organizing her daily medications into a plastic organizer her late husband Robert had bought her before his passing 2 years ago. At 65, Adina's life had become a careful balance of stretching her modest pension and social security checks. The walls of her apartment told the story of a life well lived. Photographs of smiling kindergarten students from 3 decades of teaching, a wedding picture showing her and Robert dancing under twinkling lights, and countless crayon drawings gifted by the neighborhood children who still visited her regularly. This particular morning, Adina stood at her window, watching the neighborhood come alive. Mrs. Thompson from next door waved as she collected her morning newspaper. The Rodriguez twins, both 7, raced past on their bikes, shouting, "Good morning, Miss Adina." They still called her Miss, despite her repeated reminders that she was retired now. These small moments made her smile, even as she worried about the growing stack of medical bills on her dining table. Her heart condition had been getting worse over the past few months. The medication costs kept rising, and her insurance covered less and less. Adina had started cutting her pills in half, trying to make them last longer, knowing deep down how dangerous that was. But what choice did she have? Her pension barely covered rent and utilities, let alone the astronomical healthcare costs. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Adina hosted an informal reading circle for neighborhood children in her small living room. Parents trusted her with their little ones, just as they had when she taught at Lincoln Elementary. The children would gather around her worn armchair, eyes wide as she brought stories to life with different voices for each character. These moments were her joy, her purpose, even as her chest sometimes tightened with the effort of reading aloud. That morning, as Adina organized her medications, she noticed her heart medication bottle was almost empty. The refill would cost $246, money she simply didn't have. She pushed aside the worry, focusing instead on preparing for today's reading circle. Little Maria was struggling with long words, and Adina had found the perfect book to help her practice. Looking in the mirror, Adina adjusted her silver hair, pinned neatly as always, and straightened her blue cardigan. Her face showed the gentle lines of a life spent smiling, though recent stress had deepened them. She touched the locket around her neck, the one containing Robert's picture, drawing strength from it as she did every morning. Little did Adina know that in just a few hours, her careful routine would be shattered. The chest pain she'd been ignoring would become impossible to dismiss, and her life would change in ways she could never have imagined. As she sat down with her morning tea, watching the neighborhood children walk to school, Adina had no idea she was about to become the center of a story that would touch millions of hearts and expose the harsh realities of America's healthcare system. The pain was already there, a dull ache she tried to ignore. But fate had other plans for Adina Mitchell, and soon the whole world would know her name. All because a simple hospital visit would turn into something extraordinary, something that would make people question everything they thought they knew about healthcare, humanity, and hope. The first sharp pain hit Adina as she was reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar to Little Maria and Tommy. She paused mid-sentence, pressing her hand against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The children noticed immediately. You can't fool a child's keen eyes. Maria touched Adina's arm, concern written across her small face. Mrs. Thompson, who had stopped by to pick up her grandson Tommy, recognized the signs immediately. Adina's face had gone pale, a thin sheen of sweat appearing on her forehead. The book slipped from her trembling hands. Mrs. Thompson acted quickly, ushering the children to the kitchen and calling 911 while keeping her voice steady to avoid frightening them. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its sirens piercing the quiet morning air. The whole neighborhood seemed to pause. Curtains twitched, doors opened, concerned faces appeared. The paramedics worked efficiently, hooking Adina up to monitors, their expressions growing more serious as they checked her vitals. Possible cardiac event, one murmured to another. We need to get her to Memorial Heights immediately. Memorial Heights Hospital stood like a fortress of modern medicine, its glass and steel structure gleaming in the morning sun. It was the most prestigious hospital in the city, known for its cutting-edge treatments and wealthy clientele. The ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance, where a team of nurses waited with a gurney. The emergency room buzzed with activity, but something changed when they wheeled Adina in. The head nurse's expression shifted subtly as she glanced at Adina's worn clothing and simple jewelry. She began filling out forms, her questions sharp and clinical. Insurance provider? Adina tried to speak through the pain, explaining about her limited coverage. The nurse's pen stopped moving. That's when Amanda Blake, the hospital administrator, stepped in. Tall, immaculately dressed in a charcoal gray suit, she carried authority like a shield. She reviewed Adina's information, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the clipboard. Her voice cut through the emergency room noise. I see no insurance verification. We'll need payment confirmation before proceeding with any non-essential treatment. Adina struggled to sit up on the gurney, her chest tightening with each breath. Please, she managed to say, I can make payments. I just need help. The pain was getting worse, radiating down her left arm now. The monitor beside her beeped more urgently. Amanda Blake remained unmoved. Memorial Heights has a strict policy regarding uninsured patients. We can stabilize you, but any additional treatment requires financial clearance. She spoke as if reading from a manual, her words precise and cold. The other patients in the waiting area watched the scene unfold, some recording with their phones, others averting their eyes in discomfort. Mrs. Thompson, who had followed the ambulance in her car, stepped forward. This is inhuman. She needs help now. But Amanda silenced her with a practiced gesture. Ma'am, this is hospital policy. We're a private institution, not a charity. The minutes ticked by. Adina's breathing grew more labored, each breath a struggle. The medical staff stood by, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge hospital policy. One young nurse kept glancing at Adina's vitals monitor, her hands fidgeting with her stethoscope. The emergency room had fallen into an uneasy silence, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors and Adina's increasingly difficult breathing. Some patients had started whispering among themselves, phones recording the unfolding scene. A mother pulled her child closer, covering his eyes. An elderly man in a wheelchair shook his head in disgust. Amanda Blake stood her ground, clipboard held like a barrier between herself and the growing tension in the room. Without proper payment verification, our hands are tied. She spoke louder now, as if trying to convince herself as much as others. These are hospital protocols. That's when the automatic doors slid open. A tall figure in a black jacket walked in, moving with quiet purpose. Few noticed him at first. All eyes were on Adina, who had begun to slump forward, her face contorted in pain. But as he made his way through the crowd, people began to turn. Something about his presence commanded attention. The man stopped at the nurse's station, directly facing Amanda Blake. He removed his sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes that held both kindness and steel. The room grew still. A phone clattered to the floor. Someone gasped. Because standing there, in the middle of Memorial Heights Hospital's emergency room, was none other than Keanu Reeves. No one could have predicted what would happen next, or how this moment would change not just Adina's life, but the entire healthcare system in their city. The story that unfolded in the next few minutes would be shared millions of times, spark nationwide debates, and remind everyone what humanity in healthcare really means. Amanda Blake's face drained of color as she recognized Keanu Reeves standing before her. She gripped her clipboard tighter, but maintained her professional demeanor. Mr. Reeves, while we appreciate your concern, hospital policy clearly states Keanu raised his hand, silencing her mid-sentence. The emergency room had transformed into an arena of tension. Every eye watched as Keanu stepped closer to the administrator's desk. The security guard by the entrance shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. A young resident physician had stopped writing in his chart, his pen frozen mid-sentence. "Let me understand this clearly," Keanu's voice carried across the room, calm yet powerful. "You're watching a woman suffer, possibly having a heart attack, and your response is to demand payment?" The monitors connected to Adina continued their urgent beeping, a soundtrack to the unfolding drama. Amanda straightened her spine, desperately trying to maintain control of the situation. "Our policy protects the hospital's interests. We have shareholders to answer to." Her words hung in the air, each syllable exposing the cold machinery of profit-driven healthcare. Adina's condition was deteriorating. The young nurse who had been monitoring her vitals spoke up, her voice trembling but determined. "Her blood pressure is dangerously high. We need to act now." Mrs. Thompson held Adina's hand, tears streaming down her face as she watched her friend struggle for breath. The crowd in the emergency room had grown. Patients scheduled for routine visits had stopped to witness the scene. Someone was live-streaming the entire incident. A pregnant woman in the waiting area stood up, her voice breaking the tension. "This is what happened to my mother last year. She didn't make it because they waited too long." Amanda Blake's perfectly maintained facade began to crack. She glanced at her phone. Notifications were already popping up. The hospital's social media mentions were exploding. But she doubled down, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "Mr. Reeves, while your concern is admirable, we cannot make exceptions. It would set a dangerous precedent." Keanu's expression hardened. He turned to address the room, his voice carrying the weight of purpose. "Is this what healthcare has become? A business that values profit over human life?" Phones recorded his every word, capturing the moment a Hollywood star confronted the brutal reality of American healthcare. The hospital CEO's office had been notified. Security cameras swiveled to focus on the scene. Amanda's phone buzzed repeatedly, urgent messages from hospital board members who were watching the situation unfold on social media. But she stood her ground, years of enforcing policy having hardened her against such emotional appeals. Adina's monitor began alarming more intensely. The young nurse looked desperately between her patient and the administrator, torn between protocol and her oath to help those in need. Other medical staff gathered at the edges of the scene, their faces showing the internal struggle between their calling and their employment. A doctor in scrubs pushed through the crowd, his badge identifying him as Dr. Marcus Whitlock, head of cardiology. He took one look at Adina's vitals and turned to Amanda, his voice sharp with authority. "This woman needs immediate intervention." Amanda held up her hand. "Doctor, you know the protocol's daft." But Dr. Whitlock wasn't finished. "I've spent 30 years saving lives in this hospital. I won't stand by and watch us become this." The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Other staff members began stepping forward, their silence finally breaking. The young resident who had been frozen earlier spoke up. "In medical school, they taught us first, do no harm. Watching someone suffer while we debate payment, that's harm." His voice shook, but his words carried across the hushed emergency room. Amanda Blake found herself increasingly isolated. The crowd had grown hostile, their phones recording her every move, her every word. She could feel her carefully constructed world of protocols and policies crumbling around her. But she had one last card to play. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice taking on a condescending tone, "while your movies may present a simplified view of right and wrong, the real world is more complicated. We have procedures " She never finished that sentence, because at that moment, Adina's monitor began to sound a critical alarm. The cardiac monitor showed dangerous arrhythmia. Dr. Whitlock moved toward his patient, but Amanda stepped between them. Without payment verification " her words were cut short by Keanu's voice, now filled with a quiet fury that made the room go completely still. The situation had reached its breaking point. In one corner, a woman's life hung in the balance. In another, a system designed to prioritize profit over people stood its ground. And in the middle stood Keanu Reeves, about to demonstrate why sometimes the biggest acts of heroism happen not on movie sets, but in the real world, where the stakes are life and death. What happened next would not only save Adna's life but would fundamentally change how Memorial Heights Hospital, and eventually hospitals across the country, approached patient care. The next few minutes would become a viral sensation, a moment when Hollywood met healthcare, and humanity won. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a black credit card. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "How much?" Amanda blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. The initial assessment and emergency cardiac care could run upwards of $50,000. The actor didn't flinch. "Cover everything. Full treatment, private room, the best care this hospital has to offer." He placed the card on the counter with such finality that the sound seemed to echo through the emergency room. "And every other patient in this emergency room right now. Their bills are taken care of too." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda's hands trembled as she reached for the card. In that moment, Dr. Whitlock seized the opportunity. "Get her to Cardiac 1, stat." Medical staff sprang into action, their previous hesitation evaporating. Adina was quickly wheeled toward the emergency cardiac unit, Mrs. Thompson following close behind. But Keanu wasn't finished. He turned to address Amanda directly, his voice carrying the weight of decades of witnessing both scripted and real-world injustice. "The bill isn't the end of this conversation. What happened here today? This isn't healthcare. This is cruelty masked as policy." The emergency room had become absolutely still. Patients, staff, and visitors stood frozen, many still recording. A janitor had stopped mopping, his mop handle gripped tight as he watched the scene unfold. The pregnant woman who had spoken earlier was openly crying. Amanda struggled to maintain her composure. "Mr. Reeves, you don't understand the complexities of running a hospital dash," he cut her off again, but this time his voice was gentle, almost sad. "No, Ms. Blake. You don't understand the complexities of being human." The hospital CEO burst through the doors, having rushed down from his top-floor office. He was red-faced, tie askew, already aware of the social media firestorm engulfing his institution. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Richard Maxwell, CEO of Memorial Heights. Please, let's discuss this in my office dash." Keanu stood his ground. "We discuss it here, where it happened. Where everyone can witness it." He gestured to the crowd, their phones still recording. "Where policies almost cost a woman her life." The CEO tugged at his collar, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes watching this unfold. A young nurse stepped forward, her badge identifying her as Emily Torres. "Sir," she addressed the CEO, "we've been trying to tell administration for months. The payment before treatment policy. We've lost patients because of it." Her voice cracked, years of suppressed guilt and frustration breaking through. Other staff members began speaking up. A security guard mentioned turning away patients who couldn't pay. A billing clerk recalled elderly patients choosing between medication and food. The dam had broken, and years of accumulated stories came pouring out. The CEO raised his hands, trying to regain control of the situation. "Please everyone, this is not the appropriate forum dash," but Keanu interrupted again, his voice steady and clear. "This is exactly the appropriate forum. These are the people your policies affect every day. Not the shareholders in their boardrooms. Not the executives in their offices. These people. Here. Now." Amanda Blake had backed away from her station, her clipboard now hanging limply at her side. The perfect world of protocols and procedures she had built around herself was crumbling. She watched as decades of enforcing policies that she had convinced herself were necessary began to unravel. A code blue alarm sounded from the cardiac unit where they had taken Adina. Dr. Whitlock's voice crackled over the intercom. "She's stabilizing. We got to her in time." A collective sigh of relief swept through the emergency room. The young resident who had spoken up earlier wiped tears from his eyes. Keanu turned back to the CEO, his expression firm but compassionate. "Your hospital saves lives when you let it. Your staff wants to help people. That's why they chose this profession. But your policies are forcing them to choose between their jobs and their humanity." The CEO looked around the emergency room, really seeing it perhaps for the first time. He saw the worried faces of patients, the determined expressions of his staff, the phones recording every moment. He saw Amanda Blake, standing alone, her perfect facade finally cracked. "What do you want?" the CEO asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu's response was immediate. "Change the policy. All of them." Make this a place of healing again. He paused, looking around the room. And reinstate every staff member who was fired for putting patients before payments. The emergency room erupted in applause. Nurses hugged each other. The pregnant woman stood up, hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The janitor pumped his fist in the air, his mop forgotten. Amanda Blake watched it all, her world shifting on its axis. She thought about all the time she had enforced those policies, believing she was doing her job, protecting the hospital's interests. Now, standing in the midst of this transformation, she realized how far they had strayed from the true purpose of healthcare. Keanu's credit card was still on the counter. But what he had really given went far beyond money. He had given the hospital back its soul, its purpose, its humanity. And in doing so, he had not just saved Adana's life, he had potentially saved countless others who would come through these doors in the future. As the CEO nodded his agreement to these demands, as the staff celebrated, as patients hugged each other in relief, no one noticed Amanda Blake quietly slip away to the cardiac unit. She had something important to say to Adina Mitchell, if she would listen. Because sometimes, the greatest transformations happen not to institutions, but to the hearts of those who run them. In the cardiac unit, Adina Mitchell slowly opened her eyes, the steady beeping of monitors replacing the chaos of the emergency room. Dr. Whitlock stood by her bed, checking her vitals with a satisfied smile. You gave us quite a scare, Mrs. Mitchell, but you're going to be fine. The blockage was caught in time. In the corner of the room, Mrs. Thompson sat wiping her eyes, relief evident on her face. Adina, you won't believe what happened out there. That wonderful man, Keanu Reeves, he didn't just pay for your treatment. He changed everything. News of the incident spread like wildfire across social media. Hashtag Memorial Heights Transformed trended nationwide. Videos of Keanu's intervention garnered millions of views within hours. Major news networks picked up the story, turning a local incident into a national conversation about healthcare accessibility. The hospital's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. By evening, they announced sweeping changes: immediate suspension of the payment before treatment policy, creation of a patient assistance fund, and review of all denied cases from the past year. The transformation that had begun in that emergency room was becoming institutional. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened in Adana's hospital room. Amanda Blake knocked softly on the door. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by genuine remorse. She approached Adana's bed, her clipboard noticeably absent. Mrs. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. What I did, what I've been doing, it wasn't right. Adina, still weak but alert, looked at the woman who had nearly denied her life-saving treatment. Instead of anger, her eyes showed understanding. We all get lost sometimes, she said softly, but we can all find our way back. The hospital staff witnessed their own revolution. Nurses who had been afraid to speak up now voiced their concerns openly. The young resident who had challenged the system was appointed to a newly formed patient advocacy committee. Dr. Whitlock began developing new protocols that prioritized patient care over payment verification. Local news crews camped outside the hospital, capturing the transformation in real time. Former patients came forward with their stories, each account adding to the growing demand for change. The pregnant woman from the emergency room, Maria Santos, became a vocal advocate, sharing her mother's story and celebrating the hospital's transformation. Richard Maxwell, the CEO, made a public statement acknowledging the failures of the old system. Today marks a new chapter for Memorial Heights. We lost our way, prioritizing profits over people. Mr. Reeves didn't just pay a bill today, he reminded us of our true purpose: healing. Keanu himself had slipped away quietly after ensuring the changes were in motion, but his impact remained. The story resonated because it wasn't just about a celebrity's generosity, it was about rediscovering humanity in a system that had forgotten it. Amanda Blake found herself at a crossroads. After days of reflection, she approached the CEO with a proposal: transform her position from enforcing payment policies to helping patients navigate financial assistance programs. I want to be part of the solution, she explained, her voice carrying new purpose. The hospital's transformation became a blueprint for others. Healthcare administrators from across the country visited Memorial Heights, studying how they balanced quality care with financial sustainability. The Patient Assistance Fund, started with Keanu's initial donation, grew as other donors stepped forward. Adana's recovery progressed steadily. Her hospital room became an unexpected hub of change. Staff members stopped by, sharing their own stories of frustration with the old system and hope for the new one. The young nurse who had first spoken up about Adana's critical condition became a regular visitor, often bringing updates about the hospital's ongoing changes. 1 week after the incident, Memorial Heights hosted a community forum. Patients, staff, and administrators came together to discuss the future of healthcare in their community. Adina, now strong enough to attend, received a standing ovation. But she used her moment to highlight the bigger picture. This isn't about me. It's about ensuring no one else has to choose between life and money. The local medical board took notice. They began reviewing policies at other hospitals in the region, using Memorial Heights as a case study in healthcare transformation. The ripple effects continued to spread, touching lives far beyond those present in the emergency room that day. For Adina, the experience brought unexpected purpose to her retirement years. As she recovered, she began working with the hospital's new patient advocacy program, using her teaching skills to help others navigate the healthcare system. Her story became a powerful testament to the possibility of change, even in the most entrenched systems. 1 month after the incident, Memorial Heights Hospital had transformed beyond recognition. The cold, corporate atmosphere had been replaced by one of genuine care and compassion. The lobby, once dominated by payment requirement notices, now displayed a simple message: healing first, always. Amanda Blake's journey became an unexpected symbol of personal transformation. She threw herself into her new role as patient financial advocate with the same dedication she had once applied to enforcing payment policies. Her office, previously a place patients dreaded, became a haven where they found help navigating insurance, payment plans, and assistance programs. The story reached Hollywood, where it sparked a broader conversation about celebrity influence and social responsibility. But Keanu Reeves declined all interview requests, sending only a brief statement: "Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege." What happened at Memorial Heights should be the norm, not the exception. Adana's recovery progressed remarkably well. Dr. Whitlock attributed it not just to the medical care, but to the overwhelming support she received. Her reading circle children made daily visits, filling her room with hand-drawn get-well cards. The hospital staff learned that their former policy problem was actually a retired teacher who had touched countless lives. The young resident who had spoken up during the crisis, Dr. James Torres, found himself leading the hospital's new ethics committee. Under his guidance, Memorial Heights developed protocols that balanced medical necessity with financial realities, ensuring no patient would ever again be denied urgent care due to payment concerns. Richard Maxwell, the CEO, underwent his own transformation. He began making regular rounds in the emergency room, speaking with patients and staff, understanding the human impact of administrative decisions. His corner office, once isolated from hospital reality, now featured a wall of patient thank-you letters. The hospital's financial structure shifted dramatically. Anonymous donors, inspired by Keanu's actions, contributed to the Patient Assistance Fund. Local businesses established partnerships to support community healthcare initiatives. The hospital discovered that prioritizing patient care actually improved their bottom line as community support grew. Amanda Blake's most significant moment came during a staff meeting where she shared her story of change. "I used to measure success in dollars saved," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "Now I measure it in lives touched." Her words resonated with administrators across the country who were grappling with similar challenges. The emergency room where everything began became a symbol of the hospital's transformation. The young nurse who had first spoken up about Adana's condition, Emily Torres, was promoted to emergency department supervisor. Under her leadership, the ER developed new triage protocols that considered medical need above all else. Adana's influence extended beyond her recovery. She began volunteering at the hospital, using her teaching experience to help elderly patients understand their medical care and rights. Her gentle presence in the halls reminded staff daily of why their mission mattered. The Rodriguez twins, who had been part of Adana's reading circle, started a Kids for Care program at their elementary school, collecting spare change for the hospital's Patient Assistance Fund. Their initiative spread to other schools, demonstrating that compassion knows no age limit. Memorial Heights became a case study in healthcare transformation. Medical schools sent students to observe their new protocols. Healthcare administrators from across the country visited to learn how they balanced quality care with financial sustainability. The Memorial Heights model became a blueprint for change. Mrs. Thompson, who had witnessed everything from the beginning, organized a community support network for patients needing non-medical assistance, transportation to appointments, meal delivery, or simply companionship during recovery. Her initiative filled gaps in care that no medical protocol could address. The hospital staff's morale soared. Gone was the tension between their medical oath and hospital policies. They could focus entirely on patient care, knowing the institution supported their decisions. The change was reflected in patient outcomes, staff retention rates, and community trust. Dr. Whitlock published a paper in a leading medical journal about the hospital's transformation, highlighting how prioritizing patient care over immediate payment actually improved long-term financial stability. His research challenged long-held assumptions about healthcare economics. The pregnant woman from the emergency room, Maria Santos, delivered her baby at Memorial Heights 3 months later. She named her daughter Hope, inspired by the changes she had witnessed. Her delivery room was the same one where Adina had recovered, a coincidence that felt like poetry. Amanda Blake's office wall now displayed a framed photo from the day of crisis, showing Keanu Reeves standing in the emergency room. Below it hung a simple quote, "Every policy has a human cost." It served as a daily reminder of her journey from enforcer to advocate. The transformation reached beyond hospital walls. Local government officials, inspired by the changes at Memorial Heights, began reviewing healthcare accessibility across the city. The ripple effects of one moment of crisis and compassion continued to spread, touching lives far beyond those present that day. For Adina Mitchell, watching the hospital's transformation brought a profound sense of purpose to her recovery. Her near tragedy had become a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest transformations. Her story became not just about survival, but about the power of compassion to transform an entire system. 1 year later, Memorial Heights Hospital celebrated what the media called its Humanity Anniversary. The Grand Lobby hosted a gathering that brought together everyone touched by the events of that fateful day. Adina Mitchell, now fully recovered, stood at the podium, her silver hair neatly pinned as always, her blue cardigan replaced by an elegant blazer that marked her new role as the hospital's patient rights ambassador. "A year ago, I walked into this hospital thinking it might be my last day," she began, her voice strong and clear. Instead, it became the first day of a new chapter, not just for me, but for healthcare in our community. The audience, filled with hospital staff, former patients, and community members, listened intently. Amanda Blake sat in the front row, no longer the cold administrator of before. Her transformation had become legendary within healthcare circles. She now led workshops for hospital administrators nationwide, teaching them how to balance financial stability with human compassion. The manual she wrote, From Protocols to People, Transforming Healthcare Administration, had become required reading in hospital management courses. Dr. Whitlock stood nearby, proudly wearing the Physician of the Year pin he'd received for his role in implementing the new patient-first protocols. His research on the financial benefits of compassionate care had revolutionized healthcare management theory. Under his guidance, Memorial Heights had become a teaching hospital, training the next generation of doctors to see patients as people first, cases second. The Rodriguez twins, now a year older but still full of energy, had raised over $50,000 for the Patient Assistance Fund through their Kids for Care program. They sat wiggling in their chairs, wearing matching T-shirts with the program's logo. Their initiative had spread to schools across the state, proving that even the youngest members of society could drive meaningful change. Richard Maxwell, the CEO, looked different now, more human, less corporate. The past year had taught him that true leadership meant standing with your community, not above it. Under his guidance, Memorial Heights had become a model for hospitals nationwide, proving that compassionate care and financial stability could coexist. Mrs. Thompson's Community Support Network had grown into a formal program, with volunteers helping patients navigate everything from transportation to emotional support. She had discovered that healing went far beyond medical treatment, and that community involvement was as crucial as clinical care. But the most profound change was visible in the emergency room, where it had all begun. The space that had once been a battleground between policy and compassion now stood as a testament to humanitarian healthcare. A small plaque near the entrance read, "Every life has value. Every person deserves care." Below it hung a black jacket, donated anonymously, a reminder of the day everything changed. Adina concluded her speech by sharing something she'd learned from her years of teaching. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures or famous faces. Sometimes it comes from simply refusing to accept that things cannot be different. A year ago, one person stood up and reminded us of our humanity. But it was all of us, every patient, every staff member, every community volunteer, who turned that moment into a movement. As the audience rose in applause, Adina caught sight of a familiar figure slipping quietly through the back door, a man in a black t-shirt, trying to remain unnoticed. He gave her a gentle nod before disappearing, just as he had a year ago. Some things hadn't changed. Keanu Reeves still preferred to let his actions speak louder than his presence. The celebration marked more than just an anniversary. It marked the triumph of compassion over protocol, of humanity over policy, of community over corporate interests. Memorial Heights had shown that healthcare could be both compassionate and sustainable, that healing could extend beyond medical treatment to touch the very soul of a community. As Adina left the podium, surrounded by well-wishers and friends, she touched the locket still hanging around her neck, the one containing Robert's picture. "We did it," she whispered, knowing that somewhere, he would be proud of the change she had helped create. Because in the end, the greatest transformations don't just change systems, they change hearts.